Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Usually Fixing and Tinkering, and one of my updates. So, Focus and Ruby, Mr. Ink and Ruby. So, this car, since the last episode you saw me feature this car, there was a number of jobs that had already been completed to get the car onto a base level, a safe level, and to prepare it for its first MOT. And I am very proud to announce that this car has unexpectedly passed its MOT with flying colours. There was a little bit of a surprise actually in the phone conversation with the garage. I'd already previously seen that the car passed its MOT with some advisories, notably on the front and rear discs being slightly scored but not severely weakened. I knew this anyway. I was surprised that the pads weren't mentioned, and that will be the next job on this car. We'll do the front brakes in one episode, and then we'll go to the rear brakes in another. Yeah, because these brakes, they sound like chopper blades going down the road, noisy as hell, and it really is letting the driving experience down. So, another job done. So the MOT man, he phoned me up and he said, your car's passed, good news. Front and rear discs, just down as advisories. But your car actually failed the emissions. Actually, that's not to be unexpected. It's a 20-year-old car. It's on the original CAT. They can be quite marginal on Mark 1s, although I got to be honest, the CATs on the 1.82 litre Zetec engines are a lot more robust than on the 1.4, 1.6 Sigma. Being an underfloor CAT, it's not as hot. It's exposed to a lot more road salt. They generally don't last as long, whereas these are mounted in the normal place right next to the engine where they heat up very, very quickly and are far more efficient, which is why on Mark II Focuses they designed the Mani Cat, as they call them, the manifold cat assembly, which is a manifold and cat all in one. So if you get either issue with one of those components, the whole thing has to be changed. That is now a redesigned configuration on the Sigma engines on a Mark II Focus. So they obviously learnt from this experience that underfloor cats are not as good. But I'm thinking, well, the first thing he said was it had failed, but then he said they put some Cataclean through the system and it passed the emissions. Great, fantastic. I was still a bit annoyed because they were going to charge me £45 for the MOT and £30 to put some treatment in to get it to pass. And there's me thinking, well, I've got a pass, which is great, but I'm a bit annoyed about that. Should that have been necessary? Should they have just warmed it up a bit more? The car wasn't exactly piping hot when I left it there, and they let it stand for a couple of hours before they did the test, put it that way. But they should have let it warmed up. If it was that marginal, it would have probably required just another 5-10 minutes of revving and then it would have passed. That's generally how cats behave. They only work efficiently when they are up to serious temperature. And if your car is marginal, 50 Shades was marginal a few years ago when the original cat started to go out and I needed to warm it up before the MOT, and I had a slight arrangement with the garage at the time where they would keep it running, put it straight on the emissions and pass good. That's how it used to work, but I was cross. So I went down to the garage, and this is a top tip here because this is weird. I went in and the first thing I asked for was, can I see the emissions fail result? Because if it has failed the emissions, there'll be a fail sheet, okay? And the receptionist, she said, oh, okay, no problem. And she went away. I was about to pay the £75, but I thought, no, I'm going to ask for that fail sheet. And if I see the fail sheet, I can't prove anything. I've got to pay £75. She came back with the boss who did the MOT, and he said, I'm so sorry, we've confused you with another car. We've had 2 Ford Focuses in today, which it wasn't a Mark 1, it was a Mark 2. And he very kindly showed me the notebook where he actually wrote both of our cars right next to each other, in a very lackadaisical manner, not organised at all, no columns or anything. They just writ it on a page in a book, and they said we have confused you with the other car. So I was, oh, fantastic, lovely, that explains that then. So it was just a £45 flat fee. I leave that garage thinking, that's suspicious. So you're telling me that other Focus failed, was past the MOT, but I was advisories on discs as well. The coincidence of two Focuses that have both got corroded, scored discs on the advisories is unbelievable. I don't buy that story. I believe they tried to con me out of 30 quid there. And as soon as I asked them for proof, I rumbled them. That's what I think happened there. And it's a shame, because I've used that garage before. I won't be using them again. I've definitely rumbled them. You have to be aware about MOTs, and things like this happen all the time. So buyer beware, just to start off this video. But anyway, Mr. Ink, we'll get onto this. As I say, the interior is looking really nice. Lovely carpets. Yep, already starting to look dirty as well with my feet. The gear knob has been sorted. I took the knob out, cleaned off. What was going on is, the reason this knob wasn't pushing out immediately was because the amount of Gorilla Glue that had gone hard, and it was just catching on the knob so it wouldn't come back out. So I took it out, cleaned all the old Gorilla Glue off, put some new stuff on, stuck it in, gaffer taped it so to push it in. And then after a few hours, I took the gaffer tape off, and that is no longer going to fall out. So that is a gear lever repaired, because getting another one with the silver gear shift knob, quite difficult actually, to be honest. But as far as everything else is concerned, we've got rid of a lot of gremlins. We've also managed to, I actually found something quite interesting. There was a cable that was hanging out of this centre console when I was cleaning this console. And it turns out there was a Nokia handset just behind the heater fan. And it went up to an aerial in this A-pillar. So I can only assume that somebody's been using some sort of Nokia handset that needed an aerial. There was a ton of wiring. The wiring was everywhere at the back. I thought, what the heck is all this wiring? I know this is a pretty, not in totally fully loaded Mark 1, but it's quite busy with electronics. But I didn't realise there was this much stuff in here. And I pulled it all out, and it kept on coming. There was like 3 meters of wire going around this thing. So I'm pleased to have thrown that in the bin. Excuse the lack of a photo. I should have taken a photo of that. But otherwise, we're all good. And in terms of the exterior of the car, we have been doing a lot of polishing in the door struts as well. It's all nice and clean. The whole of the car has been polished and wet sanded where necessary. The bonnet is looking really, really good. Obviously, I've got to touch that in, actually. I've got to get some more touch-up paint. The roof, there is evidence. I don't think you can see it, but there's some streaks. This car has sat under a tree during its life, and a tree has definitely left some sap, which has started to eat into the clear coat. But now I've polished it, it looks virtually... The only obvious one is a scratch. Sort of... Oh, can you see it where my finger is? There we go. That's the most obvious bit of scratch work. But obviously, it's made this ginormous dent. So, someone has definitely put something on it here in the past. Nothing's hit the car. I don't think it's been hit by a branch or anything, because there'd be paint loss. This is definitely a smart dent repair job. I think it can be done. I really do. Because I don't want to have to... Taking these out is impossible without breaking these mounting clips. You can't do it, and that would be a bit of a bugger, so I've got to consider that. The boot has obviously got some rusty corrosion around this part, which is usual. Apart from that, we've got a whacking great dent there and 2 little ones there. I don't know what someone's been doing, but the tailgate will probably get done with the back bumper, which is looking a little bit better, and I've made it look a bit better. But apart from that, yeah. Oh, do you like my new registration plates? I couldn't stand the old ones. I had to get some new ones made. And I've always hinted at doing this in the past, because now we've left the EU, we can now have the GB and the British flag. And I'm thinking that is rather nice, because the blue goes with the rest of the paintwork of the car. So, yes, WV54 MYP is definitely looking good. The silver foil, This is, by the way, this chrome finish, it's fake. It's like a silver foil, and it's just started to bubble out a little bit there, but it's all been rather nicely cleaned up, and I've cleaned all around these areas. There's absolutely no corrosion whatsoever around here. Oh, the headlining started to go a bit funny yet again. I don't know why. I think I possibly need to just tape that back in, but they all go a bit bowy. It's better than 50 Shades, but there's no boot leaks because we don't get boot leaks on estates. Basically, we have some new parts. Now, I know what people are going to say. I have never had an issue with Comline brake discs. Beatrix had them, Ruby's got some at the front, and 50 Shades is wearing them as well. And these are the exact same ones. They're coated discs for about £33 with a discount. New calipers, new hoses attached to the calipers. That I've just attached these. They're separate. They're Febby hoses. And some Bendix brake pads that have got a good deal, so they're all going to go on. The lines don't need to be done, but everything else needs to be done at the front. So yes, I'm going to shut shop, and we'll leave that for the next episode on this car. In terms of the alloy wheels, I'm not going to deal with them yet because they're in appalling condition. They need a total refurb, and they'll be done last of all. I'm not willing to mess about with these until probably I'll be tempted to do something in the summer, but overall, all good. The headlights are not in massively great condition. No, they're not in massively great condition. I have given them a bit of a wet sand, but I wasn't hoping for a miracle on that one. But overall, it's okay. The paint on this grille really doesn't match. Now I've polished the rest of the car, this is an incorrect shade of ink blue, but this is what people produce. Now I've got to get this sprayed up, but I'm actually tempted now to do it myself, because there is a company that make these door cappings that fit really nicely, and they pre-paint them, but I've got a feeling that this car no longer matches the paint that it should have had from the factory, or at least it's oxidized possibly, and the polish has brought it back a little bit. But it no longer matches. I mean, I'm actually looking at the paint on here, and it's actually much darker. So I wonder whether this has been done before, but it needs to be replaced. It's horrible. In terms of infrastructure, this car works like an absolute dream. It is super smooth, and I have absolutely minimal complaints at all. I think in terms of the suspension, it feels a fraction on the tired side, but it's not that bad at all. There's no knocks and clonks, and the infrastructure in here is just so reliable. Turn the key, done. We have also got a new battery in charge. We've got an Exide 075 in charge of everything, and it's been much better to start, much easier to start, and it's cured a couple of little gremlins I think we had before, but yeah, we've just polished this side. There is some dirt, which is typical because there'll be some rusting underneath the door mirror as typical, but everything else has been done. And actually, apart from the odd minor dent here and there, it's amazing. The paintwork's really come up, and I've always wanted a blue car, and I've never been able to quite get my hands on one. I always liked it as a colour, personally. So yeah, all good. And obviously, reproduction tax disc, which some people have found completely hilarious already. Very nice indeed. Anyway, as far as Mr. Ink is concerned, you know, it is front brakes, rear brakes, and they'll get done in the next few episodes, which I will film. As far as anything else is concerned, we have an engine mount to look at. Actually, this is another point, and this is really something you need to pay attention to. The rear engine mount that goes to the back of the gearbox, that is swinging a bit too much. I'll tell you something though, like I've said before, when I stop at junctions, there is hardly any vibration from the gear, which will be the gearbox mount and the Hydra mount, okay? They're the ones that will get you a nice, smooth, non-vibration idle, right? But the swing mount is moving too much. When I'm putting it in gear or drive or reverse, this engine is moving backwards and forwards way too much. It needs to go. And visibly, I can move it with a crowbar. That is not how they should be. Now, the problem is the parts number for the these engine mounts are all different sizes, whether it's a manual or automatic. The parts number for a 2-litre auto is it's obsolete. Can't get it from Ford. No aftermarket manufacturers make it. Big problem. But hang on, just a second. If it's the same gearbox, wouldn't a 1.6 auto mount that's fitted to 50 Shades fit? It will. I don't know why it's under a separate parts number. It could be that the mountings for the 2-litre auto the rubber could be a bit firmer because there's more torque with this setup, okay? But I'm going to give it a try. It should fit, but what results it has, I don't know. But it will fit, because whether it's a Sigma or a Z-Tech, the engine and the gearbox are mounted in exactly the same places, whatever configuration. So the auto box will be sitting exactly the same distance away from the subframe, and therefore it will be the same mount. The manual gearbox mounts might be fractionally longer, I think, than the auto, because the gearbox is slightly less fatter and it doesn't sit out as much, and it has a different engine mount. It has a different mounting at the back. So I'm going to try one for 1.6 auto, and I've done it before on this channel, so I don't need to repeat it, but I'll see how that goes. But that should improve the swinging nature when it goes into D and when you're revving the car, because I can feel two movements: a movement of the engine transmitting into the cabin, and two, the movement of the car. There should only be the movement of the car, not movement of the engine and then the car. Just saying. Right, Ruby. Right, okay. I need to get the key. That would actually help, Andrew. So there has been a few things I've been looking at with Ruby. I'm just going to take this cover off and let it breathe just a little bit. We have had some rain, as you can see, but this car cover is continuing to do an excellent job, albeit with some drops here and there. Oh, it was open. That was casual. I didn't even lock it last night. That wasn't a good thing. Oh dear. So in terms of where we are with Ruby, yep, that hasn't broken. We are in a good frame of mind with Ruby. So we have had some problems with this car, which I didn't really overemphasize in the last episode. So I was mainly talking about the bonnet lock release. They were horrendous for playing up back in the day, and people are right, they used to snap regularly. I wonder how many of them that this car has been through. By the way, now I can show you this now. We do have a slight radiator leak that has always been here, because this coolant level does go down a little bit. Can you see a little bit of coolant down there? What's happening is there's a gasket. So on radiators with plastic side tanks, as is the way since the 80s, there's a crimp along here and there's a gasket. Okay, now what I suspect is that gasket is just a little bit shrunken, and it's just leaking a little bit of coolant just at the bottom. And what happens is it will only leak coolant not when the engine's running, but after it's been turned off and contraction has happened to that gasket. So it's okay as a radiator, it holds pressure, and there's a good pressure in this cooling system. But the reason I'm losing coolant and it's dropping down, which somebody actually pointed out, and I thought, oh, it was at the right level, but actually it's dropping actually. Why is that dropping? And it's that. But it has done that quite a bit throughout the time. Oh God, there's a bit of rust creeping in down there again. This is a real problem area, these valances, but it's only minor stuff. But anyway, I need to talk to you about this carburetor setup, because we've had two different issues. Firstly, there was a tapping sound at the last two videos of this car. The tapping sound a bit too high, don't you think? Yes, and it wasn't as quiet as it was before. Getting dust on all this, and that's because of two reasons. Dodgy tappets. Now, I have just done all this work since the last update very quickly. dodgy tappets and a dodgy camshaft. So I was sold a brand new BGA camshaft for this car and brand new tappets, and it was bedded in. I've revved it high you've got to do that to bed the cam in. If you just let it idle, that's no good. You're going to get a worn cam and tappets very easily. You must rev it at 2000 RPM quite a lot in the bedding. And I had to do the same because of the rings anyway, and that's going well. This car does still puff a little bit of blue smoke at idle, and the oil level just fractionally goes down. That's it. It doesn't puff any smoke when driving. I am very pleased to report. So I've got a feeling that what I've done is, I don't think there's been much of a difference with the rings, although I think the compression is much better. I've got to do that at some point, but the compression feels excellent the way this car pulls. But I do think there was something dodgy going on with those valve stem seals, and I did allude that I think they were funny ones that I put in, and the CVH stem seal tool from Sealy did a lot of damage to them studs. That really did not help. So the camshaft that I was sold, in a nutshell, is the wrong one. They sold me a camshaft for an earlier CVH. Brilliant. You've got to be careful as well, because there's injection camshafts, because you don't have the lobe for the mechanical pump. You'll have a lobe for the carburetor CVHs. So there's two different ones there, but there's the earlier ones as well, and they're not applicable to each other. So they made a cock up, and I had to take it out, send it back to them, and they gave me another one. And I got a little bit of compensation for it as well, just some discounts, put it that way. And the discount was used to buy new tappets. So I'd gone to somebody else for the tappets, and those tappets were faulty. So again, I had to get a refund. Those tappets would not shut up. They wouldn't load. I could still squeeze them with my fingers. That is not right. The oil pressure on this engine is superb. I did check that. I took the oil sender out at the back of the engine, put my oil pressure gauge in, and there's a reading. There's a reading at idle, and there's a reading at 2000 RPM. And I can confirm that this engine produces nearly double what the figures say. And then at 6000 RPM, the oil pressure limiting regulator valve in the pump stops it going any higher, and that was working as well. Honestly, this has got such good oil pressure, and this is what you do. You put the correct stuff in. People think that putting thicker oils in because you've got an oil burning issue is going to solve the problem. You're just going around it, and you're causing other issues. Increasingly low oil pressure as well. So that's why this engine's got such good oil pressure. No issues there. So I confirmed that, and that's where I found out that it was the wrong cam. And also the tappets are faulty. So I got a refund for the tappets, but I also went to the company that sold me a dodgy camshaft that put their hands up. They sent me the correct one, which was under a different parts number for the later cars. And they also sold me new tappets. And I'm pleased to report that this car works absolutely like it's so quiet. It's even quieter than it was before. So there you go. I had to do a lot of faffing. I had to take everything off again and start again. Now that was the first issue. The second issue was that this car would idle fine, except you drive it and you get up to about 2000 RPM, or somewhere between 15 and 2000, something around about those two. I would get backfiring. I would get coughing and spluttering and cutting out. And when it started to happen, it wouldn't stop happening. And it's nothing to do with the carburetor. I thought this is the carburetor playing at fault. And what I did is I bought some different size jets just to have a play around with this carb, because we know how marginal this carb is with blocking idle jets. But what I've actually ended up doing was making it worse. So I'll just point out one thing. This mark, okay, these punch marks on the distributor. Now remember when I bought this distributor, it was a brand new one from the NEC, new old stock, 30 quid. I absolutely stole the bugger, because I know that these are about 200, 250 brand new. So it eliminates a lot of issues, and to repair the broken one that I kind of snapped. Excuse me, that was my fault. So I've done a load of trial and error testing, but I came to one conclusion. So let's just recheck the timing, because I made that punch mark before I rebuilt the engine, and the car went to Kent and it behaved perfectly on the original jets that were slightly marginal, a little bit marginal, but they worked absolutely fine, and this car drove perfectly fine. So why was it playing up now? Simple. I checked the timing. 800 RPM, you put the strobe gun on, it should be 10 degrees. Those punch marks, if they line up, should be 10 degrees. Guess what? It certainly wasn't. It was 16 degrees, and that is far too advanced. Number one, well, that's your problem. That's why your car basically splutters under load at 2000 RPM, and it won't play ball once it starts playing up, because it's getting too hot, too advanced timing, too hot. Risk of burning out exhaust valves. Thankfully, it hasn't happened too many times. But also, why? If those punch marks line up, why after an engine rebuild has it changed? It shouldn't change. And then I was thinking, it's got an aftermarket BGA camshaft in it. Now what happens with this distributor, for those who don't know, is it's driven by the camshaft. There's a dog drive, a slot in the end of the camshaft that drives the gear that drives the distributor. What I think's occurred is that slot is fractionally in a different angle. So this distributor has to sit at a different angle to those original marks with this camshaft. Because if I reckon, because I've still got the original camshaft, if I put the original one back in, the lines would mean 10 degrees, but the new one, because obviously the slots are in a different position for the drive, that means that me lining those marks up does not get 10 degrees. It got 16 degrees. So those marks are now incorrect. So what I've had to do is wind this back, and the actual clue, the telltale was actually here. There's a lovely sticker at the front. So your spark plugs have to be 0.70 to 0.80 millimeters. I've gapped them to 0.8. Number two, you have to plug the vacuum pipe to the distributor. And at 800 RPM, you have to have 12 degrees. So that's what I've done. I've timed it to 12 degrees. And by the way, these lean burn engines, this is a fantastic long update as usual, guys. Brilliant. These engines run like absolute rubbish at 8 degrees. If I time this up to 8 degrees, it will sound like an absolute dog. It really does sound like a dog, and that is because it's a lean burn engine. Lean burn engines deliberately don't have enough advance in them so that they have a tiny amount of fuel, small amount of fuel than normal, less time to burn it, and therefore the cylinders are hotter, and therefore there's less hydrocarbons. Your exhaust is cleaner. It is not, I tell you what, lean burn engines are nothing to do with performance or economy. They are all to do with emissions. This is where cars started, well, manufacturers were looking towards catalytic converters. Lean burn was just a technology which was a step forward towards cat cars. And believe you me, I think we should have just gone to cat cars straight away. So there's your problem. But there was also a third problem, guys. Right, I'm going to bring you in here. There is a vacuum pipe that connects to the inlet manifold. That vacuum pipe, I mixed up. There's another vacuum pipe that goes to the back of the carburetor. That goes to another place. I ended up mixing those hoses up because I thought they were in the correct order. Now my throttle kicker, which is part of the carb, that throttle kicker is designed to keep the car at a certain RPM on the automatic models using this solenoid here to prevent the car from basically dying when you put it in gear. So old school automatics with carburetors, you set the idle to 900 RPM, you put it in gear, and what happens? You go to 700 and the car's shaking forever. It doesn't like it. That's what used to happen in my old P6, and a lot of automatic classics have that problem. You put it in gear, there's load on the engine, can't cope, the idle goes down and everything gets a bit shaky and a bit marginal. What that throttle kicker does on the manual gearboxes, it works differently. It's to slow the throttle down. It's a throttle dampener. On the automatics, it uses that solenoid. That solenoid will only switch on when you go into gear. When you're in park neutral, it switches off. There's no vacuum applied to the kicker. When you go into gear, it applies a vacuum to the kicker and it keeps the idle at 900. So if I set the idle to 900 and I put it in reverse or drive, it stays at 900 and it's very, very smooth. Then the other vacuum hose, so that vacuum hose, I basically put the vacuum hose from the manifold, from the carb to the kicker, okay? And the one from the manifold goes to the distributor advance, okay? Now, that meant that I was getting advance. Now, this advance mechanism, it's vacuum operated, and it will give you a little bit more advance at idle and when your foot is off the pedal. So instead of 12 degrees, let's say, I'm getting about 15, 16, and it keeps it nice and smooth at idle. But as soon as you move off, the vacuum from this hose disappears, because when you open the throttle, the vacuum inside the manifold disappears inside the engine. So therefore, this vacuum advance stops working. Therefore, when you move off, you lose the vacuum advance, but the mechanical bob weight advance starts working. Bit technical for a lot of people, but old school people will know exactly what I'm talking about. So guess what I've done? I mixed the hoses up, of course, like I've said. So the throttle kicker didn't work, so my car was dying every time I put it in drive. It would just go to 700, and worse, if I put the headlights on, it's 600. Probably want to stall on me. And this distributor was actually advancing too much. Why? Because it's not meant to go in that order. So those hoses were meant to go in the opposite way around. So this hose that goes to the vacuum advance is going to the carburetor, and the manifold vacuum goes to the throttle kicker. That's the way round they go. And because I got them the wrong way round, I was getting too much advance, no throttle, and my timing was all the way out because the distributor wasn't lined up properly. So I had 3 different problems going on. It's all very technical, but basically, now I've switched those hoses round, it runs correctly. Now, that means there is no vacuum that comes from this carburetor port. By the way, the hose that goes from the vacuum advance to the carburetor, that is ported vacuum. And ported vacuum does not exist at idle. There is no vacuum at idle. So there's nothing coming out of this hose to operate this vacuum advance at idle. Now, that means that there's no advance going on, and it's a little bit more rougher. That is the way these engines were designed to operate. They are designed to be a little bit rough at idle, and it isn't quite as smooth as it used to be, but it's connected the way it should be. And I've got a feeling that ever since I rebuilt the carburetor originally, when I started doing regular episodes with this car, I put those hoses on the wrong way round, and it's been like this ever since. So I actually went to Kent with those hoses the wrong way round. So I wonder what it's going to be like in the future. I do know it's much better. I have driven this car briefly, but I've got to drive it properly. And I now have a throttle kicker as well. The throttle kicker is connected, obviously, through that hose to the manifold. And that is what we call manifold vacuum. And manifold vacuum is stronger idle. So therefore, the throttle kicker will work at idle at all times when it's in gear. Okay? So, technicalities out the way. I forgot to put the HT lead back on. Yes. I've been doing some testing with HT leads, but I don't know where it's gone actually. I should have put that back on. But anyway, I've also reinstated the original ignition module because I suspected there was a problem with the one I bought, and that was a Cambiari one. I think it was failing because that was certainly giving me issues at idle. So now I've put the original one back on, and I'm going to get another one, I think an intermotor one, because this is an intermotor coil, if you remember me putting that on. So yes, all good. And I tell you what, everything works. Now, the massive thing about this car, like I've said, we've got these vacuum lines and solenoid decay valves. We've got another decay valve on the way to the vacuum advance. These decay valves control the vacuum through these hoses for a specific reason, and they often play up, they get blocked. The carb traps at the back get blocked as well, and I think there's an awful lot of vulnerabilities of this carburetor. The DFTM 2830 is a very, very renowned carburetor for problems. And once again, my friend Rob with his 1.4 Escort with exactly the same carburetor, almost, is having problems with it again after being rebuilt by a specialist. It's a real problem, but I think I've got the knack of this carburetor. It may sometimes cough itself, but most of the time it behaves itself. And I'm delighted to report that all the symptoms I described earlier have completely vanished, and this car is well on the way to now being a working classic, ready for the show season. I am really delighted about that. By the way, the DFTM 2830, it was one of the last Weber carburetors that was manufactured before the launch of the Weber CFI with its single point injector. I don't like them. I think they're absolute rubbish. There are so many issues with that system. I prefer a carburetor like this. As much as this has given me a lot of pain, this carburetor is a 2A. The 2A is unique to the automatics through a couple of linkages. So if you've got a manual car, you'll have a 1A, which is slightly different to mine. We can't mix and match. I couldn't fit the one off Rob's car onto this and vice versa. It just doesn't work that way. But it is a very unique carburetor because it was only ever fitted to a Mark III Fiesta with this engine, with this gearbox. And as far as I'm concerned, I have done some research to confirm this. How many 1.4 Mark III CVTs exist? I want to know that, and I did some digging. This is the only one on the roads. That's it. This is the only one MOT'd and taxed. There are 5 others that are sawned. One of them is on eBay. I think it's in the picture. Yeah, that's actually up for breaking. But unfortunately, I asked this fellow for some parts and I was interested in the gearbox, and I didn't get much of a response. I suspect that I don't know if it's a phony advert, but it's a real car. But it's Ruby's twin, but that's been long dead off the roads, sadly. So there are another 3 others that are undiscovered because I haven't seen another 1.4 CVT auto. The majority of Mark III autos, and there are only about 20-30 of them that are on the roads as far as I'm aware, are all 1.1 or 1.3 Valencia HCS units. So basically what I'm saying is I was very lucky to get myself a spare carburetor of this, because as far as I'm concerned, that carburetor was only ever fitted to this particular model and car. So the only customer that could possibly want a rebuilt one, and believe it or not, Weber have got some brand new ones of this carburetor in stock, £500. I'm glad that this is working at the moment, because, you know, I think I'd be the only customer that would want them. And to be fair, the owner of this car, whether it's me or the next owner, the next custodian, we're the only customers that would want such a carburetor. Anyway, I will leave you be. Oh, by the way, in terms of other carburetors, you can't. Not without modifying the inlet manifold. That has occurred to me. I have done my research, and no other carburetor would work with this engine, believe you me. And it has been tried before, and people have failed. The Valencia engine is a far better engine to mix and match carburetors. But as far as I'm concerned, this is all good, and we are ready for the show season. In terms of F-Reg examples, as far as I'm aware, we have lost another 2 F-Reg examples. There are only around 14 F registration cars that are currently active and are in a condition where you think they're going to survive. Most of them, I suspect, 1, are sawned, Most of them are either, by the way, some of them are not taxed or sawned. They're just shown as X on the system. No MOT, no tax, no sawn. So they'll probably be rotting in a farmyard hedge or something. There's about 30 of them out there, but they're all rotting. There's only about 14 that are any decent, and Ruby is now one of them. She probably wasn't when I first bought her. Not on appearance, maybe in terms of general bodywork, but I'm hoping to keep this car for as long as I can. And I might start to look ahead at maybe the future for this car, because I don't really want this being out here for too long. But saying again, the car covers have done me a great thing. But as far as I'm concerned, I couldn't have asked for a better classic, because it's given me a headache, it's given me challenges, but I'm winning very, very slowly. And some of you will see Ruby at shows this summer. There are some Ford shows that I will be attending with this car locally in the Midlands, and I will go from there whenever I come to that. But anyway, you take care, guys, for this very long update. The next episode will be Mr. Ink's brakes, I gather, how to change your brake calipers, discs and pads, because in these days with Mark 1 Focuses, we don't just do the odd pad and disc, we do the whole damn lot. Calipers and hoses, maybe a brake line if you need to. Luckily, I don't with that car. Anyway, you take care, guys, and from me, Ruby and Mr. Ink, look after yourselves.